Almost every single day, I run into somebody who tells me a horror story about when they were purchasing a home or when a loved one was purchasing a home. And I thought I should create a video that teaches people the top 10 mistakes to avoid when purchasing a home. So stay with me and I'll teach you my top 10 tips, and maybe you'll learn something that might save you some heartache. Tip number one, and a very common one, is not getting pre-approved first. Not getting pre-approved before you start the home buying process can be a huge mistake and lead to major disappointment. It's critical that you get pre-approved before you start the process so that you can understand exactly how much you're qualified for and which mortgage product might work best for you. There's dozens of loan products that are available to most buyers, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, so it's critically important that you get pre-approved before you start the process so that you're armed with that information going into the home buying process, and it will help save you a lot of heartache. Tip number two is not understanding the entire process before you start. The home buying process can be extremely complex for most people, and as a matter of fact, it is broken down into 18 sequential steps. Not understanding the entire process before you start can lead to you taking steps out of order and leading to major problems and disappointment and setting yourself up for a lot of frustration going through the home buying process. So always make sure that you learn the entire process before you start. Tip number three is overlooking additional costs to purchasing your home. It's important to understand that when you're buying a home, the purchase price is just the tip of the iceberg as it relates to how much it costs to purchase a home. This kind of goes with tip number two in understanding the entire process, because it's important to understand that there are about a half a dozen different additional out-of-pocket costs that you need to know about before you start the home buying process. By making sure that you know all of the costs associated with purchasing a home will make it so that you can make a plan going into the process and be well prepared and give yourself an advantage in an extremely competitive buyer's market. Tip number four is don't purchase a home based on an emotional decision or based on nostalgia. Purchasing a home based on an emotional decision is kind of like falling in love with a pair of shoes that are too small. It can be easy to fall in love with a home, especially the first home that you see, but you need to approach it as a business decision. Make sure that you're thinking in the future and considering all of the contingencies of life as it relates to your housing. Make sure that you remain emotionally calm and objective, and that you're making a really good decision based on the vision and what's best for all of the members of your family. Tip number five is not researching the neighborhood before you purchase the home. The neighborhood that you purchase in, or the location, can have a major impact on your quality of life in your home and also the resaleability of your home. Make sure that you do good research about the location or the neighborhood of the home that you want to purchase so that you make sure that it meets the vision for your entire family in the long term. It's also always a good idea to lean on your agent, as they usually have a pretty good finger on the pulse of the different neighborhoods in the market that they work in. Tip number six is always avoid purchasing a house sight unseen. What I mean by this is always avoid purchasing a home without ever going and touring the home in person. Make sure that you at least go to the house after you've structured an offer and gotten an accepted offer for your inspection or a final walkthrough, or at least go see the house in person prior to closing. Purchasing a house without ever seeing it in person prior to closing almost always leads to a nightmare scenario, because as listing agents, we are paid by the seller to make sure that the house looks as good as possible. So you might want to go to the house just to verify that there's no major embellishments made in the listing description or in the listing photos. Tip number seven is ignoring future resale value. This tip kind of goes hand in hand with the tip about researching the neighborhood, in the sense that you always want to make sure that the home that you purchase is going to have good resale value in the future. Things like being located on an extremely busy road, or maybe having a cemetery in the backyard, something like that, something outside of the property lines that affects its value will always be an important factor when purchasing a home, because it impacts your ability to resell that home in the future. So don't put yourself in a position of purchasing a home that in the future, if a need arises to sell your house, you are going to face major headwinds to get it sold. Tip number 8 is overlooking the additional costs of owning that home. Again, when you purchase a home, the purchase price is just the tip of the iceberg. You're always going to have additional costs that are associated with owning a home, and they're different for every home. These are things like the property taxes for the particular neighborhood that you live in, things like insurance, things like homeowner association fees. Just make sure that you're not overlooking any of these additional costs so that you don't regret purchasing your home. Tip number 9 is not considering your future needs. A good analogy that I like to use is think about yourself in high school and the car that you chose. The car that you chose in high school is probably not the type of car that meets your needs at this stage of your life. Purchasing a home is a big decision, and you want to make sure that you're taking into consideration that your life is going to evolve over time. So it would be very smart that you would make sure that you consider your future needs when making a decision of which house to purchase. And the 10th and final and maybe most important mistake that a lot of people make is not hiring a real estate agent to help them through the home buying process. The very first step to purchasing a home is to identify and hire the person who's going to represent you through the home buying process. A good buyer's agent can be invaluable, especially to a first-time home buyer, in helping you navigate all of the trials and tribulations that are generally associated with most people's home buying process. It's also important to understand that it generally doesn't cost you anything to hire a buyer's agent. The way that it works is that when a seller decides to sell their house, they hire a listing agent to market the home and to procure a buyer. The listing agent's job is to go out and market the house to potential buyers and the buyer agents that represent them. Now, in the event that a listing agent happens to represent both the buyer and the seller, then the listing agent would retain all of the sales commission paid by the seller. However, about 90% of the time, a buyer agent matches a buyer with that house, and when that happens, the listing agent agrees to split the commissions paid by the seller. What that means for you is that you can hire a buyer's agent, and it doesn't cost you as the buyer anything to be represented. Furthermore, it doesn't make any difference to your buyer's agent which home you purchase, because the compensation is generally the same across the board. That means that your buyer's agent can help you make a great buying decision rather than trying to sell you something. So there you go. Those are my top tips of mistakes to avoid when purchasing a home. We all know that one family member or friend that had a miserable home buying experience, but more than likely, if they would have known about these particular mistakes and been able to avoid them, it would have saved them a ton of heartache over the course of the process. If you like this video and got value from this content, please give it a like and subscribe and share. And as always, thanks for watching.